Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, February 10, 2026. The Acting Director of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Todd Lyons, tells the House Homeland Security Committee, "Let me send a message to anyone who thinks they can intimidate us. You will fail." As Democratic members questioned him about federal agent tactics like the ones that led to the shooting deaths of 2 U.S. citizens in Minnesota. Senate party leaders differ on how to avoid a partial government shutdown of the Homeland Security Department when funding expires Friday. The Majority Leader John Thune pushing for another temporary extension while talks over ICE reforms continue. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer wants ICE reforms now. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnik admits visiting the private island of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, but downplays his connections to him after newly released emails appear to contradict his earlier accounts of their relationship. The House postpones a vote that would block for 6 more months any attempt to reverse President Donald Trump's tariffs because enough Republicans to defeat it have said they would vote no. President Trump threatens to delay the opening of a bridge connecting the U.S. and Canada unless the U.S. is given a 50% ownership. Senate Judiciary Committee holds a hearing with mobile phone company executives about former Special Counsel Jack Smith seeking phone records of members of Congress during his investigation of President Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election. And a group of monks arrive in Washington, D.C. after a 3-month walk of peace from Texas. Associated Press writing that Todd Lyons, the head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, defended his agency's officers before Congress on Tuesday, standing behind their tactics and saying they would not be intimidated as they carry out the president's mass deportation agenda. Lyons was one of the 3 heads of agencies implementing President Donald Trump's immigration agenda to testify in a hearing called after the shooting deaths of 2 Americans at the hands of federal officers. They face fierce questioning from Democrats and support from most Republicans over how they are prosecuting immigration enforcement inside American cities. That was the reporting from the Associated Press. Here's part of Todd Lyons' opening statement to the House Homeland Security Committee.
Before discussing our broader operations, I must address the situation in Minnesota and the dangers that ICE agents and officers face nationwide. While the investigations remain ongoing, I'm encouraged that some Minnesota officials are finally signaling the willingness to cooperate with ICE. But let me be clear, promises are not enough. We need action. In the wake of the unprecedented border crisis of the previous administration, ICE has stepped into the breach to enforce the law. This commitment has a cost. We are facing the deadliest operating environment in our agency's history. In fiscal year 2025, death threats against ICE personnel increased more than 8,000%. Assaults on officers have skyrocketed over 1,400%. One officer in Minnesota had his finger bitten off by a protester, egged on by elected officials characterizing our officers as the Gestapo of secret police. The families of ICE personnel have been made to feel unsafe in their homes. I know this firsthand because my own family was targeted. But let me send a message to anyone who thinks they can intimidate us. You will fail. Despite these perils, our officers continue to execute their mission with unwavering resolve, and we are only getting started. ICE remains committed to the fundamental principles that those who illegally enter our country must be held accountable.
Todd Lyons, the ICE acting director, testifying before the House Homeland Security Committee on Capitol Hill. Sitting beside him, Rodney Scott, Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, and Joseph Edlow, Citizenship and Immigration Services Director. More from the AP article on the hearing. This is the first time all 3 have appeared in Congress since the department received a huge infusion of money from Congress last summer, and since immigration enforcement operations intensified across the country. Under Lyons' leadership, ICE has undergone a massive hiring boom, and immigration officers have deployed in beefed-up enforcement operations in cities across the country designed to increase arrests and deportations. Again, that was from AP. More from the hearing, Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat from California, asking Acting Director Lyons about ICE operations.
A couple nights ago, I met with a woman who works as a cashier at a grocery store, and I told her I was coming to see you, Mr. Lyons, and she said, will you ask him? And she didn't want to give her name. She was terrified to give her name. But she said, when I get off my shift around midnight and I walk through the parking lot to my car, she said, if somebody rolls up in an unidentified van and gets out wearing all black and their face is covered and they don't have any identification and they ask me to get into the van, how do I know who they are? How does she know, Mr. Lyons? How does she know if they're an ICE agent or bad guys?
Sir, ICE agents have identifiable placards on their uniforms as well as their badges representative, but you won't see ICE agents rolling through the parking lots and just snatching someone up. ICE does intelligence-driven, targeted enforcement operations.
Well, Mr. Homan and others have said that they target individuals based on the color of their skin and the accents that they speak, and that's why people are running through the fields and factories where they work. Director Lyons, last year you said in Phoenix at the Border Security Expo that you wanted to see a deportation process that was like, quote, Amazon Prime, but with human beings. Mr. Lyons, how many times has Amazon Prime shot a mom 3 times in the face?
None, sir, but you're also...
It's the square root of 0, that's right.
Yes, sir. Yeah, but if we're gonna go down that route of my comment, I did say that comment. However, that comment was taken out. If you go back and watch the video, I did say that we need to be more efficient when it comes to removing individuals from the United States, because ICE doesn't detain punitively. We detain to remove. I don't want to see people in custody. At the end of my statement was, and again, to your point, it was a industry day for AI and efficiencies, but I did say at the end of it, but we deal with human beings, so we can't be like them.
And speaking
That's
of
the
human,
key part that you're leaving out.
Well, speaking of human beings, how many times has Amazon Prime shot a nurse 10 times in the back?
None.
How many times has Amazon Prime dragged a woman out of her car by her hair and then dragged her down the street?
None.
How many ICE agents have been fired for their conduct under your leadership?
Sir, I can get you that data. I'll get that back to you.
Is it more than 1?
I'm not going to speak about personnel actions, but I'll get you that data.
Can you tell us if at least, God, I hope at least 1 person has been fired for their conduct since these operations have begun? Are you telling us you can't even say 1 person's been fired?
Sir, I'm not going to talk about personnel actions, but we will get back to you.
But 2 people have been killed so far, is that right? A nurse named Preddy and a mom named Good. 2 people have been killed so far.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lyons, will you apologize to the family of Renee Good for being called a domestic terrorist by the president and his leadership?
No, sir.
Why not?
Sir, I welcome the opportunity to speak to the family in private, but I'm not going to comment on any active investigation.
Is she a domestic terrorist?
Sir, I'm not going to comment on the investigation. And the president and Secretary Noem are elected officials. That's their right to their comments. But as career law enforcement, we won't speak to any.
Do you agree with their comments?
Sir, I'm not going to go ahead and talk about any ongoing investigation.
Will you apologize to the family of Alex Preddy for also being called a domestic terrorist?
Sir, again, I'm not going to speak to any ongoing investigation.
Todd Lyons, Acting Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, questioned by Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat from California, at today's Homeland Security Committee. It ran several hours. We covered it in its entirety on the C-SPAN networks, and you can find it archived at cspan.org. Another AP article, Democratic leaders say a proposal from the White House is incomplete and insufficient as they demand new restrictions on President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown and threaten a shutdown of the Homeland Security Department. Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries said Tuesday that a Republican counterproposal to the list of demands they transmitted over the weekend, quote, included neither details nor legislative text and does not address, again, quote, the concerns Americans have about ICE's lawless conduct. The proposal was not released publicly. The Democrats' rejection of the Republican counteroffer comes as time is running short, with a shutdown of the Homeland Security Department threatening to begin Saturday. That was from AP. Senator Schumer spoke to reporters after the regular Tuesday Senate Democratic lunch about this.
The clock is ticking for Republicans to negotiate seriously with Democrats to rein in ICE and end the violence. On Saturday, we sent Republicans in the White House a detailed proposal, legislative text, for how Congress can put common sense guardrails on ICE that Americans are demanding and that Americans deserve. We got the Republican response last night, but it included neither details nor legislative text. The initial Republican response is incomplete and insufficient. It fails to address America's concerns about ICE's lawless conduct. We need to see more from the Republicans, and soon. There's no time to waste. While we await real details in the real text, Democrats will keep pushing for common sense reforms. They are ending the roving patrols and secret police, a code of conduct, Our proposal simply holds ICE agents. It's such a simple thing. It's hard to believe they're resisting. We simply hold ICE agents to the same standards Americans expect from their local police department from coast to coast. To be clear, these guardrails on ICE must apply across the board, including funding for Republicans' so-called big, beautiful bill. Our reforms must apply to all ICE operations. It would be ridiculous to say some ICE agents have to meet some standards, but others don't because of where the funding came from, and we never even know where the funding would come from. Democrats proudly support law enforcement, but what ICE is doing isn't law and order, it's chaos, plain and simple.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, opening up a news conference in the U.S. Capitol building. Reporters asked him if there was any chance of temporarily extending Homeland Security Department funding beyond Friday's deadline to complete negotiations over ICE reforms with the White House.
Are the negotiations at all close enough to getting somewhere that you could support a 2-week CR or 3-week CR by the end of this week?
There's no reason we can't get this done by Thursday. We have sent them legislative language.
Senator
Yes.
Senator Schumer.
What was in the White House counter proposal and what made it incomplete and insufficient?
Look, the bottom line is it was incomplete and insufficient. We need legislative language that will rein in ICE and end the violence. Their proposal didn't come close to doing that.
So just to be clear, are you ruling out any CR at all on DHS?
There's no reason we can't get it done by Thursday. Yes, go ahead.
Is that a bottom line that you must have?
I'm not negotiating in public, as you know what we believe. Okay?
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking with reporters at a Capitol building news conference. After he and the other Senate Democrats left that position, the Senate Republican leadership came out to the same microphones. They, too, had been holding their regular Tuesday lunch meeting. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, advocated for extending Homeland Security Department funding beyond this Friday to avoid a partial government shutdown.
I'm sure you've already heard from the Democrats, so we might have a slightly different view of where things are, but I think everybody agrees that we need to fund the 2026 Department of Homeland Security Appropriations bill. It's the only one left. We've got 96% of the government funded, but the DHS bill, as you know, represents not only Border Patrol and ICE, but also FEMA and the Coast Guard and TSA, cybersecurity, a whole bunch of things that are really important to the American people. And so our view is we need to try and get this last bill across the finish line, and I think there have been some really productive conversations around that between Republicans and Democrats, between the White House and Democrats here in the Senate. One thing Republicans are not interested in, obviously, is making it harder, not easier, for dangerous, illegal aliens in this country to be detained and deported. We do believe in making it easier, not harder, for law enforcement officials to do their job. So those are things that we are focused on in these conversations. But I think it's fair to say that there have been good faith efforts. The Democrats, they didn't finally get text available until just this weekend. The White House is now responding to that, and I think it's important that we allow those conversations to go forward and see if there might be a path toward getting an outcome that would fund the Department of Homeland Security until the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. So it's I would say again, it's a work in progress, but I would hope that the Democrats here in the Senate, if it takes more time, which I believe it will, would be amenable to allowing us to get an extension of the continuing resolution to allow more time for those negotiations to continue.
The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota. He and House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, both confirmed today they plan to meet to discuss what should happen next on the Homeland Security Department funding bill and ICE reforms. This is Washington Today. From NBC News, facing bipartisan criticism over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnik on Tuesday said that he had no personal relationship with Epstein, but acknowledged visiting the late convicted sex offender's island while on a family vacation in 2012. Lutnik's relationship with Epstein has come under intense scrutiny in recent days since his name appeared in a number of Epstein files recently released by the Justice Department. So far, the White House has stood by him. That was from NBC News. Secretary Lutnik testified today before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. The hearing topic was something completely different, broadband funding. But Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, the ranking member of the subcommittee, used his time to question the secretary about Epstein for several minutes.
Secretary Lutnik, as I said in my opening statement, you led people to believe that you had cut off all contact with Jeffrey Epstein after the 2005 encounter you and your wife had in his apartment. But as I'm sure you know, the Epstein files show a very different record of interaction. Why do the Epstein files show you coordinating a meeting and planning a visit with Jeffrey Epstein on his private island in December 2012?
Thank you for the question. I'm glad to be here to make it clear that I met Jeffrey Epstein when I moved to a house next door to him in New York, right? And I met him then. Over the next 14 years, I met him 2 other times that I can recall, 2 times. And that is none for 6 years. So 6 years later, I met him, and then a year and a half after that, I met him, and never again. Probably the total, and you've seen all of these documents, of these millions and millions of documents, there may be 10 emails connecting me with him, probably about 10 emails connecting me with him over a 14-year period. I did not have any relationship with him. I barely had anything to do with that person, okay?
Secretary Lutnik, I think you understand the root of concern here. It's the way you described very emphatically your first encounter with him in his apartment, said you were disgusted, would never have any contact with him again. Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it, but
Mr. Secretary, again, as I said, there's not an indication that you yourself engaged in any wrongdoing with Jeffrey Epstein. It's the fact that you believe that you misled the country and the Congress based on your earlier statements, suggesting that you'd cut off all contact when in fact you had not. When you visited the private island, did you see anything inappropriate during that visit?
the only thing I saw with my wife and my children and the other couple and their children was staff who worked for Mr. Epstein on that island.
And you realize that, you know, this visit took place after he'd been convicted, right? I mean, you made a very big point of saying that you sensed that this was a bad person in 2005. And then, of course, in 2008, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution of a minor. And yet you went and had this trip and other interactions. Did you have a dinner in Epstein's New York City home in 2011?
No.
So the information that suggests that there was a dinner with Woody Allen and Woody Allen's spouse at the Epstein residence, there's nothing to that, is that right?
I actually don't know what you're referring to. There was, look, I looked through the millions of documents for my name, just like everybody else. Yeah. And what I found was there was a document that says that I had a meeting with him on, in May, I think, for an hour at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Not dinner or otherwise, for an hour at 5 o'clock.
All right. There's also a reference to the fact that Epstein had expressed an interest in meeting your nanny. Do you know whether Jeffrey Epstein ever met with your nanny?
No, I saw that. I had no idea what that was about. It had nothing to do with me,
No
as far as
interaction
I
at all
know.
with him on that?
No, as far as I know, no.
Would you, Mr. Secretary, be willing to ensure that the file is complete to share with this committee and the Congress your own records, any records you have that relate to Jeffrey Epstein?
I will surely talk about that. I hadn't thought about that. I have nothing to hide, absolutely nothing.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnik questioned by Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, at an Appropriations Subcommittee hearing today. The hearing called on a different subject, but the senator taking the time to ask about the Epstein files. Quite a few Senate and House Democrats, and at least one Republican, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, are calling on Secretary Lutnik to resign for, in their words, lying about his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. This came up at the White House briefing with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Secretary Lutnik today was testifying on the Hill, and he said that he had visited Epstein's Island in 2012 with his wife and children, and that's after he said that he had cut ties with Epstein. And Justice Department documents show that he was in contact with Epstein through 2018 over messages. So does the White House stand behind Secretary Lutnik right now, or given what he has said today, has there been any shift in how the White House is viewing Secretary Lutnik's performance?
No, Secretary Lutnik remains a very important member of President Trump's team, and the president fully supports the secretary.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. From Time magazine, President Donald Trump has claimed for years that he knew nothing about Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes, but a former Palm Beach police chief claimed that Trump told him 20 years ago that everyone knew about Epstein's activities. The revelation came from a record of an October 2019 FBI interview with former Palm Beach police chief Michael Reiter, which was included in the most recent release of so-called Epstein files held by the Department of Justice. Reiter told the FBI that Trump called him in July 2006 when Epstein was first arrested on a state charge for soliciting prostitution to tell him that Epstein's crimes of abusing young girls were well known among socialites in Florida and New York. Reiter said Trump told him, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." That was from Time magazine, and this also came up at today's White House briefing with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
According to newly released files, the president had a conversation with the Palm Beach police chief in the early 2000s, according to the police chief in 2019. The president has gone on record before, and he's told reporters that he said that that he had no idea about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. During this conversation with the police chief, however, he did say, according to this recounting of it, that thank goodness you're stopping him. He also called Ghislaine Maxwell evil. So my two questions are, did that conversation with the Palm Beach police chief happen? And can you explain the discrepancy?
What I will say is that the president has always remained consistent, and that he kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club at Mar-a-Lago because, frankly, Jeffrey Epstein was a creep. And unlike many other people who are named in these files, President Trump cut off his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and was honest and transparent about that for years and years. And so I think what the president has said all along has always remained true. And the release of more than 3 million documents related to Jeffrey Epstein and his heinous, disgusting crimes just shows the level of transparency that this president and administration has committed to in bringing these files to light.
But did he call the chief in 2006? Caroline, did he call the chief?
Look, it was a phone call that may or may not have happened in 2006. I don't know the answer to that question. What I'm telling you is that what President Trump has always said is that he kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his Mar-a-Lago club because Jeffrey Epstein was a creep, and that remains true. And this call, if it did happen, corroborates exactly what President Trump has said from the beginning. And I'm sure many of you, when you read that alleged FBI report, probably thought to yourself, wow, this really cracks our narrative that we've been trying to push about this president for many years. So we're moving on from that.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt holding a news conference in the White House briefing room. Story from Reuters. Congressional Democrats introduced legislation on Tuesday that they said would eliminate the statute of limitations that has shielded sex traffickers such as the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer and Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez announced the proposal alongside Epstein victims and Virginia Giuffre's family. The proposal, Virginia's Law, is named after Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers who died by suicide last year. Reporting from Reuters, here is Congresswoman Leger Fernandez, Democrat from New Mexico, at today's news conference.
And one of the lines that the survivor shared with me early in the many meetings we've had, and it's chilling, it's a chilling warning that Jeffrey told them. He gave them this warning. He told the women and young girls, I have the government, I have the banks. In other words, you are powerless. Imagine hearing that from the man who abused you. Imagine being a young girl, a young woman already traumatized and being told that the system, the government, the institutions, the courts, the powerful are on his side. That he and those to whom you were trafficked are untouchable. That the world is made up of the powerful who are above the law, above reproach, and you are disposable as a mere object of sexual use and abuse. And for too long, those sexual predators have been protected by their wealth and power. And now, with the help of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, the pedophiles and sexual predators are being protected by our government. But today, we're one step closer to proving Epstein wrong. But this bill is bigger than Epstein. It's bigger than the abuse that the victims endured. It takes years for victims of abuse to feel safe enough to come forward, and time should never be a weapon in the abuser's arsenal. Virginia's law eliminates the statute of limitations for key federal civil claims brought by survivors of trafficking and sexual exploitation. It includes a look-back window, so survivors who were previously barred, who were told, no, you do not have access to the courtroom, so they have time to now go back and seek justice. And it clarifies that traffickers cannot escape accountability by committing abuses in another jurisdiction. You don't get to escape prosecution by simply putting predators and victims on a plane to a private island or a mansion in Florida or a ranch in New Mexico. Because justice should not depend on a calendar. Justice should not depend on geography, and it should never depend on how powerful your abuser is.
Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez, Democrat from New Mexico, at a news conference today with Jeffrey Epstein victims and Virginia Giuffre's family, and also Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, proposed legislation to eliminate the statute of limitation in sex trafficking crimes, named Virginia's Law. The Epstein files fallout has also reached to Europe, with Britain's monarchy saying it's ready to support an investigation of claims that former Prince Andrew gave confidential information to Jeffrey Epstein. And at today's news conference in Washington, Senator Chuck Schumer and Sky Roberts, the brother of Virginia Giuffre, were asked about Andrew possibly testifying in the U.S.
Thank you very much. Mark Stone from Sky News in the United Kingdom. Thank you for inviting me today. That was a very powerful news conference. I have a question for you, Mr. Roberts, if that's right, and also for you, Senator Schumer. Mr. Roberts, the photograph of the then Prince Andrew with his arm around your sister has become, certainly in the UK, a defining part of this scandal. Clearly, he is one person who hasn't answered questions here. What is your message to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor today, please?
I think he should show up in front of our Congress and answer questions. I think that he has a lot of questions he needs to answer, and he has been exploited through these files to have inconsistencies in his own messaging. So I want today to be about Virginia's law, to not allowing this to happen again, but to Prince Andrew, former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, to be specific, he needs to show up. He needs to show up, and he needs to answer questions in front of our Congress.
I agree. He ought to, same thing as what Sky said. He ought to show up and show up now.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Sky Roberts at today's news conference in Washington. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has faced some calls in recent days for him to resign over appointing a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson, as ambassador to the U.S. The Prime Minister met with his Labour Party Monday night, and today a member of his cabinet, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, was on BBC News.
Yesterday was a moment of peril for the Prime Minister. It was, make no bones about that. But as a collective body, the Cabinet, the Labour Party, looked at the alternatives of going down this road of a chaotic leadership election, trying to depose a Prime Minister, and they said, no, that's not for us. What's for us is focusing on the country, supporting Keir, recognizing that serious mistakes have been made, but recognizing that he's our leader and he deserves the time and space to renew the government, reset the government, and focus on the country. And I think that is so much the right decision when we think about all the challenges we face.
Great Britain's Energy Secretary Ed Miliband today on BBC News. And back in Washington, D.C., Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, in a House floor speech named 6 high-profile men included in the unredacted versions of Epstein documents that the congressman saw at the Justice Department on Monday. Congressman Khanna saying, if we found 6 men that were hiding in 2 hours, imagine how many men they are covering up for in these 3 million files. Why are they protecting these rich and powerful men? Washington Today continues in a moment.
On Wednesday, Attorney General Pam Bondi testifies at an oversight hearing on the mission and programs of the Justice Department. It comes as members of Congress will be able to view the 3 million unredacted Epstein files in person at the Justice Department. Lawmakers have said they want the opportunity to review the materials before the Attorney General appears before the House Judiciary Committee. Hear the hearing live tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN Radio, C-SPAN Now, and cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few election headlines from Politico. After an unexpectedly tight race, former Congressman Tom Malinowski conceded to progressive organizer Analilia Mejia in the special Democratic primary for New Jersey's 11th Congressional District to succeed Governor Mikey Sherrill. Malinowski, in a statement Tuesday morning, congratulated Mejia and issued a warning against the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, whose super PAC United Democracy Project spent more than $2 million against him in the closing stretch of the campaign. And Senator Susan Collins formally announced her re-election bid in Maine, a boon for Republicans' efforts to keep the Senate that also sets up another competitive election in the Pine Tree State. That was from Politico. Senator Collins going for her 6th 6-year term. From the Hill, a procedural vote slated for Tuesday afternoon is in trouble as Republican leaders seek to reinstate a prohibition on calling snap votes to repeal President Trump's tariffs. 2 Republicans, Kevin Kiley of California and Victoria Spartz of Indiana, told The Hill that they plan to vote against the rule out of opposition to reinstating the tariff prohibition. Another GOP member, Don Bacon of Nebraska, told Punchbowl News he's inclined to vote against the rule over the provision. And Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who regularly defies GOP leadership on key votes, voted against a similar rule in the past. Republicans will be able to afford to lose no more than 1 member on the rule vote, assuming all members are present and voting. Rule votes typically are party line votes that are tests of the strength of the majority. In what appears to be a nod to the difficulty for leadership, the House on Tuesday afternoon delayed the vote from 1:30 p.m. Eastern to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. That was all from thehill.com. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, was asked about this at a news conference this morning before the vote was delayed.
I'm curious about the rule today. There is a part of it that would block anti-tariff votes in the future. What's the reasoning behind that? And do you think that House Republicans will be behind that today?
I think they will. We talked about it, frankly, in our conference this morning, and the rationale for this, for just extending this for a little bit longer to July, is to allow the Supreme Court to rule on the pending case that everybody's watching and waiting for. That process has been playing out. I think it's logical to allow that to continue. The president's trade policies have been a great benefit to the country. It's indisputed what it's done. I went through some of the statistics and how that's helped the economy. And I think the sentiment is that we allow a little bit more runway for this to be worked out between the executive branch and the judicial branch, and we'll see. So I expect the rule to pass, and I think we can move it forward.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference this morning. The provision in the rule would block any House vote disapproving of the president's tariffs through July 31st. House Democrats were planning to force a vote this week on President Trump's Canada tariffs. Early afternoon today on the House floor, Congressman Joe Neguse, Democrat from Colorado, member of the Rules Committee, spoke against the tariff provision included in the rule, in the resolution.
We know that one of the reasons that prices are going up across the board in the United States are tariffs. This president's reckless policies with respect to tariffs. And we have some solutions in that regard. Ways that the Congress can finally stop abdicating its authority and exercise its powers with respect to tariffs. I think the chairman knows that because Speaker Johnson decided to tuck into the rule that we're considering today a measure that would prevent the House from considering any changes to the president's tariff policies for yet another 6 months. I'm going to read you a quote. Quote, "It will be the fourth time this rule vote putting a gag on tariff debates has been done. I don't think tariffs are good for the economy, manufacturing jobs, and the ag industry. American consumers pay the tariffs, and thus it is a big tax. I support giving these authorities back to the Congress." These aren't my words. These are Republican Congressman Don Bacon's words, your colleague, who agrees that what Speaker Johnson is trying to do is yet again gag the United States Congress. So to Mr. Bacon, I say thank you for your honesty. And to the rest of my colleagues, I say, where is your backbone? Where is your spine? Stand up for the Constitution as your colleague is doing. Stand up for the House of Representatives. Stand up for your constituents.
Congressman Joe Neguse, Democrat from Colorado, member of the Rules Committee, on the House floor. After this debate, the House went into recess, scheduled to return at 8:30 p.m. Eastern for votes on this rule. There'll actually be two votes. The first is something called ordering the previous question, which if it fails, theoretically allows the minority party to amend the rule. If the majority party doesn't simply pull the resolution off the floor, the second vote is passing the rule itself. We spoke with The Hill's House reporter Emily Brooks about ordering the previous question.
So do we know what Democrats have offered regarding the procedural vote on the previous question?
Yeah, this is a pretty rare, it's a pretty regular procedural vote, but rare that it ever actually changes anything in the House. But the previous question, Democrats typically offer some kind of partisan legislation to boost their messaging for these votes. But this one, they are offering to just simply remove this tariff provision from the rule and let everything else that is scheduled to come up and tee up under this rule move forward. And so that would be pretty rare if Republicans were to vote with Democrats to defeat the previous question and alter the rule. But that's a little bit of a wonky, fun, tempting idea that Democrats are offering there.
Well, typically a procedural vote like the previous question, that vote usually sails through. When was the last time a previous question was defeated?
Yeah, the last time a previous question was defeated on a rule measure like this was not last in 1988. So we see previous question votes all of the time, but very rarely do they ever get voted down in this way. So that would be very rare. I think there was another one potentially on another matter in 2010, but no matter which way you cut it, we haven't seen that in a very long time.
House reporter for The Hill, Emily Brooks, joining C-SPAN. Live coverage of the House resumes 8:30 p.m. Eastern tonight on C-SPAN, gavel to gavel. We can follow anywhere on our free app, C-SPAN Now. Wall Street Journal writing that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he is seeking to defuse a new row with the U.S. over President Trump's threat to block the opening of a new bridge connecting Michigan and Ontario. Carney said he spoke on Tuesday to Trump after the president's Truth Social post suggesting the U.S. should take an ownership stake of at least 50% in the new Gordie Howe International Bridge and complained that U.S. products like steel weren't used in the construction of the 1.5-mile corridor. That was the article at the Wall Street Journal. Here's more on this at today's White House briefing with the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Yesterday, the president on social media threatened to block the new Gordie Howe Bridge, which would connect Detroit to Canada. This is a bridge that was fully paid for by Canada. It used American labor to construct it. It used American steel to construct that bridge. The president in 2017 was actually in favor of this bridge, part of a joint statement that he put out when he met with the Canadian Prime Minister. Why has the president changed his mind as it relates to this bridge?
I think the president was very clear and direct in his truth, John, but just to reiterate, the fact that Canada will control what crosses the Gordie Howe Bridge and owns the land on both sides is unacceptable to the president. It's also unacceptable that more of this bridge isn't being built with more American-made materials, even more so than what President Barack Obama committed to with the Canadians at the time, at the start of the project. He also believes that the U.S. should own at least half of the bridge, have shared authority over what passes across it, and participate in the economic benefits generated by its use. This is just another example of President Trump putting America's interests first, and so he made that very clear in his call with Prime Minister Carney earlier today.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at a news conference at the White House. Washington Post writing about this. The bridge is financed by the Canadian government, but is publicly owned by the governments of Canada and Michigan, with terms outlined in a 2012 crossing agreement. The agreement stated all iron and steel used in the project must be produced in the U.S. or Canada. Canada will recoup the cost of funding the bridge from toll revenue, the Canadian government said in 2022. That was from the Washington Post. Wall Street today, the Dow up 52, NASDAQ down 136, S&P down 23. Top White House officials, begins a New York Times article, have started trying to downplay a highly anticipated jobs report set for release on Wednesday, insisting that the U.S. economy remains strong even if the data may ultimately show a fresh slowdown in hiring. The source of the administration's concern is the next monthly update from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which will offer a more official look at hiring in January, as well as a revised glimpse of the state of U.S. employment over the past year. Reporting from the New York Times, Peter Navarro, White House top trade advisor, was on Fox Business Channel this morning talking about this.
The jobs report's going to come out tomorrow. Yeah. We have to revise our expectations down significantly for what a monthly job number should look like. When we were letting in 2 million illegal aliens, they're coming in. We had to produce 200,000 jobs a month for steady state. And by the way, all of the jobs that we were creating in Biden years were going to illegals. Americans were going to the unemployment lines. That's totally reversed. And now 50,000 a month is going to be more like what we need. So Wall Street, when this stuff comes out, they can't rain on that parade. They have to adjust for the fact that we're deporting millions of illegals.
That's a good
out
point.
Of our job market.
But it sounds like you're expecting a weak number tomorrow.
No, not expecting a weak number. I'm just saying that going forward, when we see a number under 100,000, we don't wring our hands. We say, yeah, that's going to be steady state.
Peter, great to see you.
It's all good, Maria. Always great to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Peter Navarro, senior counselor for trade and manufacturing to President Donald Trump, on the Fox Business Channel with Maria Bartiromo. The January jobs report was delayed from last Friday, February 6th, to tomorrow, Wednesday, February 11th, because of the recent short government shutdown. Also, the January Consumer Price Index has been delayed. It will come out this Friday, January 13th. Kevin O'Leary, one of the investors on the TV show Shark Tank, was on Capitol Hill today, joining other economic expert witnesses at the House Financial Services Committee hearing on rising housing and borrowing costs. Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, asked Kevin O'Leary about small businesses.
As an angel investor on Shark Tank and the chairman of O'Leary Ventures, you have invested millions of dollars in dozens of companies located across the United States over the last 16 years. In working with early stage startups, investing both your time and money in up-and-coming companies, you have direct experience leading with the challenges that these businesses face. Mr. O'Leary, when you work with early stage companies, what are some of the main challenges you hear about gaining access to capital?
Between 1 and 5 million in sales, it's virtually impossible today. It really is. And the challenge is that right after about 1 million, when you stop selling your grandmother and your cousins the product and people start buying it because they want it, maybe you've been successful in social media acquiring customers, that is the time when you want to support these nascent entities because they have proven their product. So one problem is when they get to 5 million, is what generally they need to expand both on the employee base and they need more capital for inventory, because that's just at the time when the large big box retailers, which still represent 50% of sales, including Amazon, require inventory, and they're not going to receive cash on that for 60 days. That's why I talked about the factoring market. There is another problem, and I brought this up when we were having China hearings. Exactly at 5 million of run rate on Amazon for any American consumer good product, that is when the Chinese knockoffs hit. And what you would see, and it comes on Alibaba, that IP is stolen, and I've been talking about this for years.
Well, I don't have time to let you talk about it for years, sir.
Yeah,
so,
and it's stolen, and it shows up at 60% the cost of the innovation.
I hear you, and we have addressed some of these issues in the INVEST Act, and you mentioned the INVEST Act in your written testimony. And from your experience working with companies that rely on private market investors, how could the reforms included in this package help unlock capital, increase competition, and improve options without requiring additional government intervention or a subsidy?
Probably 40% of the friction is the regulation and the challenge at the regional bank level. It really is. If you could get that red tape gone, if you could deregulate it, make it easier, most of these communities would support their entrepreneurs. Even in small towns, they would do it because they can see the effect of growth. I mean, they watch these, whether it's a car dealer or a dry cleaner or a bakery, whatever it is, it's working.
Kevin O'Leary, Shark Tank co-host and investor, private equity and venture investor, testifying before the House Financial Services Committee, questioned by Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri. This is Washington Today. Story from Fox News. Phone records of sitting members of Congress were secretly obtained in a way that blocked lawmakers from invoking constitutional protections. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, alleged Tuesday during a hearing. Grassley, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican of Tennessee, who is leading the hearing, signaled that their panel planned to grill hearing witnesses, who included executives from Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, about the disclosure of the phone data. Grassley noted in his opening remarks that the three companies received a total of 10 subpoenas for 20 current or former Republican Congress members related to Arctic frost, the FBI probe that led to former special counsel Jack Smith bringing charges against President Donald Trump over the 2020 election. That was the article from Fox News. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, one of the most outspoken senators on this issue, an advocate of allowing lawmakers to sue for damages, questioned Chris Miller, Verizon Senior Vice President and General Counsel, and David McAtee, AT&T Senior Executive Vice President and General Counsel, during the hearing.
To Verizon, you had a contract with the Senate, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And that was in 2022?
We've had a contract with the Senate for Communication Services.
Okay, well, the last one that I saw was 2022. How much money was that contract worth?
I don't know, Senator.
Would you say tens of millions of dollars?
It could be, Senator. I just don't know.
Okay, that contract was had a clause in it that if anybody comes after a senator's phone records, you will tell us so we can defend ourselves. Was that a contract obligation?
Senator, I'm aware of the...
Yeah, it was. It was. So this is what you sent Jack Smith about my official. He had my official account. It says United States Senate Sergeant at Arms account. So you should have been alerted that this was the Sergeant of Arms. You have a contract obligation to the Sergeant of Arms and to me through that. The other one is my campaign phone. My personal, my campaign phone, and my official. This is Team Graham. Anyway, at the time of 2023, when they made their request about information regarding Team Graham and my official phone records, you were unable to find out that it was me. Is that your testimony? You didn't know it would involve me?
Senator, the analyst responding to that subpoena...
Well, they didn't know it was me? Is that fair to say?
I do not know, Senator.
Well, so you need to answer that because you got a contract to protect us. And you don't have anything in place to find out if we're being asked by the executive branch. You got all that money and you did nothing to earn that money because, will you agree the system failed me because I wasn't notified and you gave my information to the special counsel?
Senator, I would certainly agree we have frustrated you as a policymaker.
Well, no, you failed me. You failed to honor the contract protecting all of us. Do you realize Section 2 U.S.C. 6628 says, a Senate office shall not be barred through operation of any court order or any statutory provision from notifying the Senate of any legal process. Mr. McTee, David.
McAtee, yes, sir.
You were familiar with that, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And when you found out it was Senator Cruz, you went to bat for Senator Cruz.
We asked that question. I testified to earlier.
And they backed down and folded like a cheap suit. They never pushed. They never wanted to court, right?
They never followed up.
Yeah, because they're on a fishing expedition. So if any of you had challenged these guys, they'd went away. So the Senate gave you probably tens of millions of dollars, and I've been a customer for a very long time. What about the 430 Republican groups? What about the 197 subpoenas? We're not going to give up on this. This is a major breakdown of constitutional checks and balances, a major breakdown of protecting people you have a contractual obligation to protect, and I think the biggest weaponization of the law, but that is yet to be determined. So here's what I want you to know. If you contract for a service, you need to provide that service. And if you can't provide it, you let your customer down. The system gave you all the discretion you needed, and you didn't use it. And if you had used it, AT&T tells you what you got. How much more information do you need to know about me when it says Team Graham, Senate Sergeant at Arms?
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, questioning Verizon Vice President Chris Miller and AT&T Vice President David McAtee at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. The committee's ranking Democrat Dick Durbin of Illinois, in his opening statement, defended former special counsel Jack Smith's investigation of President Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election.
In 2020, President Trump spent months spreading the big lie that the election was stolen. Never any proof whatsoever of that fact. He pressured state election officials and members of Congress to help overturn the results of the election. Have you seen the contortions that these nominees have gone through when they're asked a basic question, who won the election in 2020? Joe Biden was sworn in as president. Well, who won the election? They won't answer it. They go through these painful contortions. They can't answer it because it's an article of faith. If you're loyal to Trump, you never accept the premise that he lost an election. And he did. He lost one in 2020. He pressured state election officials, and there were recordings of his pressure. This culminated in a January 6th attack on the Capitol, where President Trump's supporters tried to violently prevent the certification of the 2020 election. That same day, President Donald Trump was on the phone calling members of Congress to solicit their aid in blocking certification. Special counsel Jack Smith investigated this criminal effort by President Trump to overturn the election. So it's not surprising that Mr. Smith subpoenaed the call records of those the president tried to enlist in his conspiracy. To the extent the committee has questions about this, it should be former Special Counsel Smith testifying as a witness today before this committee, not 3 telecom companies who responded to legally issued subpoenas.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee ranking member at today's hearing. You can find the full hearing at our video library at cspan.org. WZTV out of Nashville, Tennessee, writing that Senator Bill Hagerty, Republican of Tennessee, has filed a complaint with the Federal Communications Commission alleging Verizon unlawfully disclosed his phone records to the Department of Justice as part of a federal investigation known as Arctic Frost. He's seeking an apology from Verizon leadership, internal discipline for those involved, disclosure of how the subpoena was handled, and changes to company policies. That was from WZTV. A group of Buddhist monks arrived in Washington, D.C. today after walking for 108 days, 2,300 miles from Fort Worth, Texas, part of a spiritual journey promoting peace, compassion, and unity. It's known as the Walk of Peace. The leader, the Venerable Bhikkhu Panakara, spoke to the crowd that turned out to welcome them in front of Washington National Cathedral.
We are not walking from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C. to bring you any peace, but to raise the awareness of peace so that you can unlock that box and free it. Let peace bloom and flourish among all of us throughout this nation and the world, so that this world can become the better place for all beings to live. And of course, to free peace, to unlock that box, we're supposed to have a key, and we must have that key to unlock it. And that key is mindfulness. It's not about Buddhism. Mindfulness is for all beings. Mindfulness is within our breath. We live with each and every breath going in and out. Without this breath, we die.
Bhikkhu Panakara, the leader of the group of Buddhist monks that finished their 3-month walk of peace today in Washington, D.C., speaking outside Washington National Cathedral. They do have one more event scheduled for Wednesday at the Lincoln Memorial before heading back to Texas. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the latest in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.